Hello, by way of introduction, my name is Jack Elder, advanced planning attorney for CBS Brokerage. I am often asked about clients that know they need to do wealth transfer planning, estate tax planning, but they're concerned about irrevocability. Well, spousal lifetime access trusts represent an ideal solution for those families. So today, I'm going to spend a few minutes going over what a spousal lifetime access trust is, when you should consider it, what are the drawbacks, and when it makes sense for your clients. So let's get started. Okay, so we're talking about strategic wealth transfer with spousal lifetime access trusts. So let's jump into it. The a spousal lifetime access trust is a fancy name. It sounds complicated. It isn't in practice that complicated to understand from a conceptual level. So a SLAT is when one spouse establishes an irrevocable trust of which the other spouse, call them the donor spouse and the beneficiary spouse, that beneficiary spouse is a beneficiary. They're commonly funded with life insurance, which I'll get into why on the donor spouse's life. And they allow distributions to the beneficiary spouse during the grantor's lifetime, thus creating flexibility. So why SLATs? Well, you set it up so that that proceeds of the insurance and any other assets you contribute to the SLAT are estate tax free. Yet there's trust access for the family via distributions to the spouse. There's asset protection from two different directions. One, the donor spouse has some asset protection, which I'll hit on, and the beneficiary spouse does as well, which I'll address later. These are flexible designs in that they could be set up as grantor, non-grantor trusts or grantor. Usually you want to set them up as a grantor trust. You could set them up as dynasty trusts, or you could have them go one generation. So you could use your GST allocation or not. But the real key on the flexibility is that you're making a gift, you're getting the tax benefits of irrevocability without the restrictions in terms of, hey, now those assets are beyond the reach of the family. And then if you're using life insurance, you also have an income tax-free result. And in the example I'm going to show you, I'm going to assume overfunded life insurance, which is taxed like a Roth. So how does a SLAT work? The donor spouse sets up the trust and funds it. The trustee purchases insurance on the donor's life. Beneficiary spouse is a lifetime beneficiary. So the donor spouse doesn't have to die before distributions are available. The trustee then, when that eventuality occurs, receives those those death benefits, income and estate tax free. So let's look at, the flow chart. So here you have the donor spouse, all their assets are in their estate. They want to get assets outside the estate and they want flexibility. So first, they're going to make a gift using separate property, and this is critical, to spousal access trust. The donor's spouse, the beneficiary spouse, will be a beneficiary, the primary, and then contingent beneficiaries will be future generations. You can fund that trust the way you would fund any other trust, with annual exclusion gifts, lifetime exemption gifts. You could use private loans or split dollar, where the donor loans funds to the trustee, or you could use premium financing, third-party loans. You can also design these, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, to be structured as a defective grantor trust, and they usually are. I would almost say should be, or as a dynasty trust designed to last multiple generations. 99% of the time, you're going to use life insurance for a variety of reasons. It's income tax free. It can be designed to build up a lot of cash. It overcomes one of the main drawbacks of spousal access trusts, which I'll get to in a minute. So life insurance is typically there, and you get that flexibility because the trust can be drafted so that the beneficiary spouse can receive distributions for his or her health, education, maintenance, and support. And then those funds can be filtered back over to the donor spouse. So picture circular transaction. And I always like to say, if you need it, not when you need it. If you know you're going to need these funds to support your lifestyle, this design doesn't make as much sense. It seems over-engineered for nothing. This is so that the family feels comfortable taking, bringing into balance their estate tax needs, but maintaining flexibility. So what are those tax benefits? Well, income tax deferred cash value growth, and it's income tax free as long as unless you have an unforced error. Income tax free distributions. So think of it almost like a Roth. You're using after tax dollars to fund an asset that grows income tax free and distributes income tax free. But unlike a Roth, there's a few other benefits. The death benefit is income tax free and estate tax free, unless you have an unforced error. And on top of it, you could be tagging in the defective grantor benefits that a defective grantor trust have regarding, like burning the estate down through through trust income taxes and dynasty trust provisions to avoid that generation skipping transfer tax. I mentioned asset protection. So there's two asset protections that are available with spousal access trusts. First is from the donor's creditors. And note that I have a note there that says timing and intent. If I'm making a gift to a SLAT or an FLP or an LLC or to anyone in anticipation of a foreseeable creditor that's looming on the horizon, that's a no-go. That's not what we're talking about. That's called a fraudulent transfer. What we're talking about is if I am making gifts for my spouse into this trust, and let's say I'm a doctor, it doesn't matter, and then I get sued. As long as those gifts that I made to the trust were not in contemplation of the lawsuit, so there's no timing and intent problem. Those gifts are outside the reach of creditors. So that's one protection. The second protection is, let's say I'm the spouse who's the beneficiary, and I get sued. And if we're using a third-party trustee, subject to an ascertainable standard, that trustee has distribution control. So they could choose not to make distributions to me, which provides creditor protection. Or so there's two different types of planning for each spouse. But it doesn't mean that there's no drawbacks and considerations. So SLATs are irrevocable. But remember, there's spousal access. So when I hear like, oh, I don't know if I want to do something irrevocable, I don't know, it seems so final. It's not as final. And that's the whole point of this type of planning. No step up in basis. True. So let's say I make a gift of securities or a capital asset, and then time passes and I die. That asset in that trust does not get a step up in basis. However, had I died with it, owning it in my estate, it would. This is one of the key areas why insurance is so common and smart with SLATs, which is insurance always gets a step up. It's called an income tax-free death benefit. So I'm making contributions called premiums with my after-tax dollars. When I pass away, the trustee receives a pool of funds tax exempt. So kind of mirrors what a step up in basis looks like. You need to keep in mind, this is you're dependent. There's a dependency on a healthy marriage here. I've seen situations where couples set up SLATs and then get divorced, and then you're in a kind of a pickle. So you really want to make sure you have a solid marriage so it makes sense. There's some drafting that needs careful drafting for the lawyers to consider, called the reciprocal trust doctrine. Picture mirror loans or mirror trusts. My trust can't look like my spouse's, right? There needs to be substantial differences, maybe in the timing of those trusts, who the beneficiaries are, the type of distributions they can receive. Is one GST exempt? Is one not? There needs to be some material differences, or else the IRS would combine them and say no gift at all took place. But that's not for that's something you need to think about. It's not from doing the planning. It's something that you need to know to do the planning correctly. So let's look at an example. We've got a male preferred best, age 45. He's going to contribute $25,000 a year for 22 years to a policy, and we're going to design it to maximize cash value by reducing the death benefit. So we're going to start off by depressing the death benefit as much as possible, and then we're going to reduce it again when we stop making premium payments in 22 years. So the blue line is the death benefit, green line is the cash value. Note, like over time, there's a substantial amount of cash value in there. Here, the family, age 45, typically not comfortable, not ready to start making wealth transfer decisions. Heck, they're still building their wealth. But here, because that cash is available, if the family needs it, it just becomes an allocation in their diversified portfolio on the fixed income side. It happens to take place in a trust. You see how that works? It all goes together. Comprehensive planning is wealth transfer. It's portfolio, it's where life insurance fits in the portfolio, and a substantial amount of cash builds down the road. And that death benefit, the proceeds are outside the estate, which is great. Meanwhile, the cash values are accessible. So it's kind of like getting the best of both worlds. And here are my final thoughts, and I'll leave you with this. SLATs aren't right for every client, but for those clients that are in empire building mode or aren't comfortable yet making large gifts, or maybe my kids are too young, or I didn't come from money, I just built this wealth, or I'm younger, a SLAT's a great solution because it combines and balances and provides that flexibility and that tax efficiency. So we are talking about SLATs regularly as the sunset to the tax exemption, estate tax exemption looms upon us. And I would just say to you all, if you have clients that are kind of sitting on the sidelines because they're not sure they want to make that big estate planning wealth transfer move, sometimes the SLAT is the tool that can help unlock their concerns. With that, we'd love to hear from you. Again, Jack Elder with CBS Brokerage. Contact information is below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much.